Alright, how's it going, guys? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the album review series on the Music Reviewer podcast. My name's Josh, and we're doing a new album review today. This is going to be episode 52. The name of the album is Chemtrails Over the Country Club by the one and only Lana Del Rey. Album was released on March 19th, so yeah, I've been meaning to get to this one. I know I say that just about every review, but yeah, we are finally here. I think it's a pretty interesting album overall, probably one of the more interesting ones I've reviewed in a while. But yeah, thanks for joining me once again. If you're not familiar with the Music Reviewer podcast, welcome. I'm just a guy that likes talking about music, and hopefully you do too. The main gist of the podcast is just me doing some album reviews, but just to let everyone know, last episode that came out was the latest review of the Kings of Leon album, When You See Yourself. Overall, I thought that was a pretty solid album for what it was for, a band like Kings of Leon. Kind of had some similar feelings, though, from like some past legacy rock acts like Foo Fighters, on kind of similar feelings like on their past record and this one from Kings of Leon. Also, a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week came out not too long ago. Best track ended up being from Rodwave, and the worst track was from Imagine Dragons. We covered some other artists, though, some Machine Gun Kelly and Corpse, NF, and Miranda Lambert. If you're interested, go check out that episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. Overall, just kind of thought it was a pretty, normal week overall for the Billboard Hot 100. I think that Imagine Dragons track that came in was probably one of the more interesting worst tracks of the week, though, in some time. Anyways, just want to let everyone know as well that there will be a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week that comes out shortly after this review. Expect that. Justin Bieber album Bomb was kind of having an internal struggle whether I'm actually going to review that album. I still might, but I don't think it's going to come out before Best and Worst Track of the Week, honestly. But yeah, enough of that. Let's get to the gist of the review from covering Chemtrails Over the Country Club. Pretty big artist overall. Lana, she's kind of had her fair share of, time in the spotlight since she's, gained some prominence sometime in the early 2010s. But just in case you don't really know who she is, she's an American singer-songwriter and record producer. She was raised in upstate New York. Lana had numerous attempts and projects since about 2005 at establishing a music career. She even had a debut album that was self-titled Lizzie Grant, going off of her real name, going as far back as 2008. And it's really worth noting she didn't really reach her current prominence until about 2011 when the track Video Games was released. There is some, there were some rumors around that time, or some, now settled or boiled over controversy about maybe Lana had been like some sort of industry plant, or was her music career funded by her father's, her millionaire father, just things like that. I honestly haven't done too much research. It's not really that important to Lana at this point. But I can just remember around that time when she first started gaining some critical acclaim, that being a hot button issue of whether, her artistic career was authentic for whatever that's worth. But yeah. I honestly remember when Video Games came out and started gaining traction. I can't really say I was blown away from what I remember. But I do remember thinking whatever she was doing was at least interesting. I guess she was categorized automatically And quite quickly, with whatever sound she was going for as like this indie or alternative type artist, I think this is mainly due to the climate of pop music at the time. She definitely would not have been able to fit into like a radio rotation during those years. It just was, her music just simply wasn't peppy enough. And plus, I think that was the peak of the club boom, if you remember that era. Think Pitbull and I guess Flow Rida. I'm sorry. Which that also leads me to believe maybe the remix of Summertime Sadness was essential to her gaining even more prominence. She should thank Cedric Gervais, I think I said that right, for that. The DJ that remixed that track, and it being like this big hit remix during that time. Since releasing her debut Born to Die in 2012, her commercial success really took off. I'd argue she's one of the first artists of her kind to make her brand of like indie pop quite marketable. The only other contemporary around the time that came somewhat close to doing that was maybe Florence and the Machine. Don't quote me on that, but all I remember, I'm basing that off of really just me being alive during that time, and me being more of like partial to Florence and the Machine simply just because I like the music more. But yeah, I don't really know that for a fact. Nonetheless, Lana is known for having a bit of a unique style when it comes to her approach in making music. Her signature sound relies on like feelings of sadness and tragedy being apparent in her music, mainly love tragedies. She's mainly goes about this with making sure most tracks have a moody nature to them when she provides haunting vocals that are usually sung a bit statically. That's not a knock on her. That's just her vocal style. Usually over some mid-tempo instrumentation that complements whatever she's doing vocally. So yeah. From album to album, this has been extremely consistent, and I'd say Chemtrails Over the Country Club fits into that mold exactly. But anywho, I do like going into reviews with a sort of fresh picture of what the previous album that was released in my mind at least, and that would have been Norman fucking Rockwell. That was released in 2019. This album was a bit of a struggle to get through for some reason. I don't remember being a fan of it when it came out, and I don't really think much of my feelings have changed, although I kind of see the album in a different light now that Chemtrails Over the Country Club has been released. For instance, the opening track, the title track, was slow burning. It was a slow burning ballad centered around piano instrumentation and maybe some accompanying string textures as well. The track also features qualities of what you'd expect early 20th century crooner music to have had. That shows up a few more times in this album in particular. And then also going into tracks like Mariner's Apartment Complex, it sounds a bit like, to me it sounded a lot like Karma Police by Radiohead, compositionally and stylistically. It's not the first time she's had similarities with them. There was like some copyright dispute not too long ago over another song of hers, over the same thing. And Venice Beach, this track sounds like something that could have been on Folklore by Taylor Swift, honestly. But the track does develop a bit stylistically when more quirky textures are added on climatic moments on the track, so I do appreciate that on that track. The album, for me, just gets a bit sleepy by the time we're to the track Love Song. And the next track, How to Disappear, brings back a bit of the crooner aesthetic, like I said before. I do dig the soft brass textures, though, thrown in on this track when they appear. California is a highlight, in my opinion, though. The anthemic nature and the tension all throughout this track is presented nicely. It's probably one of the rare moments I actually bought the angst that's presented in much of Lana's music. Happiness is a Butterfly has some shining moments that create a bit of tension as well. But the way the tension ends up being released just doesn't pay off. The lush moments end up dropping out. Also, the angsty moments on the chorus of the track just remind me of a bad interpretation of R.E.M's It's the End of the World for some reason. And I'm just feeling like this album was just hard to grasp onto for most of its runtime. Just little to no captivation. And when there was, it was very short-lived. But I will say this album did make me appreciate Chemtrails Over the Country Club a bit more, especially for the first listen or the first like sit down listen I did over this album. I wasn't really honestly impressed at all. I thought Lana was doing some pretty unusual experimentation on this album here. That mainly what bugged me was the focal or the focus on just utilizing falsetto vocals in just absurd ways. The opening track, White Dress, is a very prime example of that. But also like the production, I guess, it just, to me, a lot of the instrumentals that I guess are thrown on to this album, Lana is just unnecessarily shot up or just turned up over whatever anything else that's interesting. Any color or melodic moments or chord progressions are just kind of like pushed aside. Those moments are really just lost in a lot of this album, honestly, with how soft they are or how subtle they are. This album lacks a certain richness to it that could have been there. For some reason, they just didn't go about it. And then also a bit lacking on the low end on a lot of these tracks. I feel like the album is much better when there's some vibrant and resonating, warm low end to complement whatever Lana's doing. Especially when the falsetto sounds so thin, it has very to little weight to it. I feel like it's kind of like what happened on Folklore, to be honest. That Folklore has a lot of great songs, but they just sound very shallow and unimpacting because of the lack of depth and low end on it, in my opinion. But anyways, let's go back to White Dress. So like I said before, some unnecessary falsetto. The first time I kind of went through it, I was really asking myself, what the fuck is up with the vocals on this track? It sounds like she was going for some subtle Regina Spektor inspired stuff. The falsetto whispering really isn't flattering. It's mixed in way too high, mainly because I think there's really not much density to her voice when that happens. The stylization in this performance is just odd. The rhythmic variations that are thrown in on the chorus sound a bit unsteady and distracting at times, and the instrumentation could have been so much more lively, but it's just mixed down way too low to give any life to the track. But the track did grow on me a tad due to listening to it so many times after a certain point. I don't know if that's just a version of Stockholm Syndrome, but the track does provide the typical relaxed melancholy that's expected of a Lana track. I just kind of didn't get that sort of, I didn't realize that, I guess, at first listen. But this track is just kind of a different way of Lana going about her usual style. The next track, Chemtrails Over the Country Club, another track that did grow on me subtly. The main chorus on this track presents some ideas, especially in the vocals, that have a nice haunting nature to them that creates this chant-like style. With this triplet rhythmic pattern. It sounds quite nice. The falsetto, again, just sounds very odd, though, when it's presented. There's some more instrumentation that's just completely buried here that should provide some effect, but it just doesn't. And why do the vocals at times sound so piercing? I'm not sure why, but it happens again on certain points of the album. But the murkiness of this track is fine to an extent, but that's pretty much all I can say. I do dig it a bit more than White Dress, I think, but I'm not sure why they chose to end it on this drum track that sounded really dry. I'm not sure why it's just left out as the ending of this track. It's a bit unnecessary, and it kind of elongates the track for no reason. But anywho, the next track, Tulsa Jesus Freak, I like that this track has some more prominence to it than just some poorly executed falsetto vocals for much of the track. I don't mind the anthemic gang vocals on the refrain on this track as well. The piano is a bit more pronounced on much of this track. I think it's the best track on the album thus far. We get some nice, warm, full sound that's given by the bass when the chorus comes in. This really has a lo-fi nature to it as well. A lot of it just sounds a bit harsh, but in a good way. It's an interesting choice. Some quirky moments to it as well, like the auto-tune bit at the very end. Next track, Love Me Like a Woman. I thought this was kind of mid. Lana's natural vocal tone makes an appearance on this track. I like that there's actual weight to the instrumental as well. I like the call and response vocal lines that kind of trade on and off throughout the track. It makes the track much more captivating. We get the signature vocal timbre, the haunting vocal timbre that Lana does so well. It's on this track. And then also some nicely executed falsetto on this track as well, and some resonating bass. It just sounds a lot nicer than what we've gotten on most of the album thus far. Wild at Heart, I didn't really find it to be much of a highlight. It does feature some more traditional elements of what's presented on most of Lana's music. But my gripe with this is the vocals just sound so harsh at times, especially when the vocal harmonies at the end of the climatic buildup on this track come in. It's a big moment that was just wasted by how overbearing everything became in context to the rest of the track. But overall, I just wasn't sure to think about this track. In my opinion, it was just a bit safe and maybe a bit derivative. Dark, but just a game. We get an actual groove on this track. Like, the album thus far is a bit mid-tempo and at times lethargic. Here we actually get some groove in the album. Some dark textures are presented in the overall soundscape. Some added textures in the percussion that keep the track going and just give the track some more, captivation. There's a sultry nature to this track that I appreciate as well. Maybe some light Radiohead-esque guitar influence on the riffs that color the track quite nicely. But the track does lose a bit of excitement when we get to a more lighthearted section in the chorus. But the track isn't bad. I thought it was decent. Don't really get too much of a highlight, I guess, until Yosemite. There's a dark and murky nature here, a slow-paced tempo that really gives Lana an opportunity to really sell this performance. There's some long held-out synths on this track that add a nice layer of like dread to this track that really kind of sells the overall mood. Some light auxiliary percussion. That was a nice choice, but I was just kind of hoping for this track to go somewhere in more developed or a more developed direction that explored some more ideas, but it doesn't really do that at all. The track just ends up becoming dragged out and a bit, I guess, stagnant. Break Up Slowly. It's a bit of a short track. Another sluggish tempo here. I guess that really helps paint the picture of like the overall dread and like the slow breaking up slowly symbolism. What I take away from here, when the track comes in, she sounds a lot like Miley Cyrus. I didn't know she could do that, but I guess that's a thing. Some more murky textures in the guitar and the synths that are incorporated. The track had some potential, but, I don't think it really quite got there. The next track, Dance Till We Die, it was interesting. There's some nice ideas thrown in, some standout vocal moments, at least, some nice contrast between the more subdued vocal moments and the more emotional runs that she sings on. I do dig the groove in the middle of this track that kind of just takes over the overall nature of this track. And then we have some added textures like some brass that I appreciate being able to hear and enjoy on this track. And then finally we are at the last track for Free, which I think might be the best track on this album. The track features Weiss Blood. I like this track overall. The track features a piano instrumental that is actually pronounced melodic and features some sparkly texture to it. If the album featured more ideas like this, I think I would have been more on board. And the country sensibility and the slow down, authentic feeling nature just overall made this track a lot nicer than the rest of the album. The somber vocal harmonies thrown in at the end of the lines are nice as well. And man, can Weiss Blood really sell this country-inspired performance, and she just killed it on this track. I really like this track overall. Like I said, I think if the album sounded more like this, I would have really dug the hell out of it. But anyways, at least it ended on a high note, I will say. So a lot of albums don't do that. But overall, I don't know how I'm feeling on this. I do think, I was kind of getting at this at the beginning of the review. I think this is a better album than Norman fucking Rockwell. I don't know how much better, and I think what that comes down to is just mainly the experimentation that is implemented, although it just doesn't hit the mark. A lot of the times it's enough to keep me a bit more, I guess, on board or just captivated than what was on her previous album, honestly. I dig that she tried something new, but at the end of the day, a lot of this album just comes down to her flamboyantly trying some falsetto vocals for the majority of a lot of these tracks over some uninspiring instrumentals that should be more vibrant and give more life to the track, but it just a lot of times doesn't do that. But when we actually do get some highlights, I really think she was onto something. I don't know what really that was. Well, if I had to actually pinpoint those moments, well, take Tulsa Jesus Freak with its lo-fi inspiration. I thought that made this version of Lana, a lot more interesting. The anthemic nature on the gang vocals made the track a lot nicer. Let Me Love You Like a Woman, some nice resonating bass on the instrumental, nicely executed falsetto actually presented on here. The signature haunting vocal timbre that's presented all throughout really makes a nice effect on the album, or on this track specifically. Dark But Just a Game, another nice highlight with some Radiohead-esque guitar riffs that color the track nicely. The track also features a overall nice groove that gives the track a lot more energy, makes it feel less lethargic. And then, of course, the ending track features a nice slowed down piano instrumental that's actually pronounced with some nice melodic ideas and texture and some authenticity. Honestly, it felt like the country nature, the sensibility that's thrown in made this track quite solid, and they executed quite well. All those ideas and the overall context of this album saved it, I guess. Had that not been the case, had those ideas weren't present on this album would have been really boring to listen to. That's just my opinion. And also, I think overall, this is just a hypothesis, but I think this might be Lana's answer to folklore. Honestly, I don't know if she really cares about Taylor Swift, but she's obviously conscious about her place in the music industry. She's made some comments in recent memory about her not fitting in quite as well as maybe some other indie artists contemporaries. Not that Taylor Swift fits into that category either. But hey, maybe she's trying to challenge listeners in the music industry with this album. Especially with there's like an overall, I don't know how to describe it, an overall attitude to this album. I guess that's the best way to put it. And it kind of just maybe nudges me towards thinking it's a lot like the sort of, I guess, concept that folklore was maybe trying to go for, with the low-key nature overall. But obviously that's Lana's MO. But I feel like this just takes it to another level too. But if I had to rate this album, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. But honestly, yeah, I mean, I think this is a wild card album. If you're into Lana, you might really like this album. This might be one of your favorite Lana albums too. I can't say that for myself. I'm not a huge Lana listener. I've only heard so much, so it's just my opinion. If you're just into like indie pop in general, I've heard her categorized as dream pop, but I don't think that's the case at all. But if you're more into like the aesthetic of things in your music, this really might bug you, like it did me. But hey, you might really pinpoint some things that you really like too. I don't know. Just give this album a listen if you're interested, because there's some moments on here that I think can really be appreciated. Just overall, it's just not the most consistent thing I've heard. But yeah, that's my review of this album. If you stuck around, thanks for listening on this episode. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you're there. If you're digging what you heard, leave a comment. Tell me how bad I did, or don't do anything at all, or tell me, hey, great job. Whatever you want to do. Subscribe on your your preferred streaming service too. But anyways, yeah. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you later.